Alright guys, so this is the beginning of building an 8x8 shed or a playhouse in the near future. The first step that we have to do is laying the floor down, figuring out what we want to do and how we want to build it. This is probably the most crucial portion of the entire structure based on the fact that if you don't do this right, your entire structure is going to be uneven, unleveled, and leaning. So you want to make sure that you do this part right. I'm going to show you the material that I use in order to do this, and there's different ways to do this, but this is the way I did it this time. Okay, so what we have here are some concrete blocks. You can see in the middle of the blocks it's almost like a cross beam. Basically, it goes 4 different directions. So no matter which way you lay this, as long as you lay it straight with the next one, the boards are going to lay right inside of them. So we're going to use this as the bottom base for our floor joists. And I'm going to show you what I used in order to make my floor joists. So we're going over to pressure treated lumber. The reason you want pressure treated lumber is that it avoids any corrosion, any bugs coming through, and just basically takes care of it's able to withstand all the elements of being outside. So the difference between pressure treated lumber and regular lumber, I mean, you can see the difference itself. The regular lumber, or the studs that we're going to be using for the inside of the shed, is this lighter material, and the more reddish material is the pressure treated lumber. So make sure that when you're dealing with this stuff, though, that you're wearing gloves, because this stuff gets all over you. Just keep in mind this is not good for animals, so if you are using pressure treated lumber, make sure that you're covering this up somehow. Alright, so the very first step that we're going to be taking is cleaning up the area that we're going to be working around. Just make sure that you don't have any rocks or anything that's going to be an obstacle for these concrete blocks to lay flat. So I really wish I could work this fast in real life. Unfortunately, I can't, so we're able to speed up the video some. We have our very first visitor of the day, Mr. Paisley the dog. You'll be seeing him throughout the entire project. Okay, so this step now is figuring out where you want to lay these blocks. Get a general idea for where you want the ending of your shed, or the front of your shed, to be, and an idea to where the backing of your shed is going to be. So you want to make sure you have some area around your shed that you're going to be able to walk around as well. So there's different ways to do this. You can make batter boards and put 4 corners on each side and level everything out with a string level, and do different ways. I'm running off of my wall here, and basically just getting a general idea of how far I want it off from the wall, and I'm dropping the block in one spot, making sure that everything's going to be even from that point on. So okay, so what I'm showing you here now is that this block right now is right at my 8-foot mark. I'm making an 8-foot by 8-foot shed. I do not want this block at the end right on 8 foot, so I need to move it down to 7 feet. I do not want any more than a foot hangover from my board joist at all. So make sure that you move it backwards a foot. As you can see here with this block, there's a foot behind the actual mark, and the foot is going to be right in the middle of these cross beams. You want an overhang of at the most a foot. So you want to get the most expansion out of your floor joist that you can with these blocks. However, you do not want to create a tripping hazard of any sort at the end with these concrete blocks being, all the way towards the end or the corners of your shed. I've seen people do it that way. That's not the correct way to do it. You're just going to create a tripping hazard in the future. This portion right here, all these blocks are going to be covered up. So get your level, make sure everything is leveled out. If you need to make any adjustments with some sand on the bottom of these, go ahead and do so. There's different ways of doing this. You can go 16-inch on centers with these blocks. What I'm doing is, I know in the end result the project I'm making is going to be an 8x8, so I'm going to use 9 different blocks, and I'm not going 16-inch on centers with these. I'm going to spread it out to where it's an even spread. Okay, once you have your first row down, that's basically going to be the row that you're going to be working off of. So you can see that I went to the far end row now of the blocks that were laying down, and I went to 8 feet and moved it back to the 7-foot mark. Again, I want that foot overhang on the right side. I want a foot overhang around the entire shed from these blocks. Alright, so the best part about this whole project and the most fun part is actually smashing this dirt in, right? So very important to do, but just make sure that you have everything leveled off. You're just using all-purpose sand here, a tamper. This is like an 8-inch by 8-inch tamper. They have different sizes. They're not expensive tools to get, but you do need to get something like this in order to make everything even. So what you want to do is just start smashing some sand down until your blocks are even from one side to the other, just using a level of some sort. If you don't have an 8-foot level, put a stud up on the both end of the blocks and put a small level on top until you get as even as possible. Okay, so here are my 9 blocks that I laid out. I'm going to be testing this out right now to make sure that everything is leveled. I'm going to make sure that everything is in place and everything is squared off so that I'm not going to have any issues when I'm laying the wood down. Again, you can see that every block, nearly every block, required all-purpose sand. Very important to buy a couple bags of these all-purpose sands because they are going to come in handy, and you would hate to have another bag in the middle of working on this. This does take some time to make sure that everything is done the right way. So make sure that you buy enough all-purpose sand before you actually start this project. Okay, so the way that I'm leveling this off is basically getting my 8-foot level here. Again, if you don't have an 8-foot level, use a piece of wood and put a small level on top of it. Whatever you have to do, just make sure that you get it leveled. I'm going to level every single direction. I'm leveling from left to right, from front to back, the sides. I'm making sure that every single direction that these blocks are laid down are as leveled as possible. I don't want any blocks to be uneven. One small block that's uneven, or the smallest unleveled portion of a block, can throw off your entire project. So that's why this is very important to make sure that you're doing this the right way so that you don't have to run into that problem. Once you have this portion down, everything should just fall into place after that. Okay, it's very important for this portion right here. You need to make sure that if you're making an 8-foot by 8-foot shed, let's say, you need to make sure that one side of your shed is at 8 feet. So with the header and rim joists that we're putting here, we need to make sure that we are at 8 feet all the way around. Measure every single board. There's not going to be one board in the world, I believe, that is exactly 8 feet unless it's been cut at the store to that exact size. So I believe that this board right here is 8 feet and a quarter inch. So I need to take that in consideration. The other things I need to take into consideration are the fact that I'm working with 2 header joists that are on each side as well. And what they are 1.5 inches in thickness. So I need to take that into consideration and add that to what I'm cutting off of this rim joist here. Okay, so to sum this up is I just need to take off 1.5 inches plus 1.5 inches for the 2 boards on each side, plus the 1/4 inch that's extending past my 8-foot length of this board. So I'm looking at 3 inches and a 1/4 inch in order 3 1/4 inch for me to take off is basically what I need to be taking off of this one board to make it 8 feet on one side. Alright, so again, I'm working on an 8x8 shed here. So whatever shed size that you're building, you're always going to be taking off 1.5 inches from each side to total out 3 inches. Always keep that in mind. Make sure that you're making your cuts right and make sure that you're measuring everything out the right way. Okay, so once you have your measurement, just take your speed square and make a line, so that it's even. If you don't have a speed square, please get one, especially for these types of jobs. You're going to need this for every single thing you're doing with this project. Alright, so now it's time to cut the measurement you made. Just get your miter saw or your circular saw, whatever you're using, and go ahead and cut away. Just make sure that you're precise with these cuts, make sure that everything's leveled and that you're not crooked with the cuts that you're making. Alright, so my dad just showed up to check out what I was doing. We'll see him throughout the project. He's going to be pretty much the head of this entire project after I do this whole entire floor. Alright, so to give you an example of what these boards come out to be, they may tell you that this is an 8-foot board, but by measuring it, you can see that there's 3/4 extra of an inch on this board. You got to remember to measure every single board that you're using to make sure that you're cutting it out to the measurement that you want. Alright, so I have these boards laid out here for you to see that the extension of these boards is not exactly a foot. What I mean by the extension of a foot is going to be from the middle of this board of the cross beam to the end of your board is going to be 1 foot. That's what's going to be able to create for the concrete blocks to be hidden underneath the shed. You don't want to create any tripping hazard, especially I'm going to be turning this into a kid's playhouse. If they're going to be running around the sides, you want to make sure that there's nothing that their feet can touch when they're running. Make sure that you're completely covering these concrete blocks. You're not going to see them at all once the whole project is complete. Alright, so you can see I have my tape measure now laid out on top of my board. Basically what I'm measuring out is specifically where I want to put this 1 foot mark at in the middle of this cross. So I have the my 1 foot laying towards the middle of it. I'm going to mark a foot on that side, and I know that that point is going to be in the middle of that cross on the concrete block. I'm going to do the same thing for the opposite side and make sure that there's a foot in the middle of that cross to the edge of that board. Okay, so back up a little bit, and let's say that you wanted to actually do 16-inch on centers. Your tape measure right here is going to show you exactly how to do your 16-inch on centers. Just look for the red marks. Those are going to be 16 inches. Every red mark is 16 inches on center. Now, if you were planning on doing it that way, you can still use these concrete blocks, and you can still line up each and every single concrete block on a 16-inch on center. It'll work for that. Or you can do it every other and hang your joist hangers, and that way you can save some money on material. Again, I'm doing an 8 foot by 8 foot shed here, so I know that with the measurements I'm making with these concrete blocks, it'll work. Again, if you're real particular about 16-inch on centers and you need to have 16-inch on centers, just use these blocks on the 16-inch on centers. It's not a big deal. It's going to create some more work, but again, that's up to you. That's your preference. Just keep in mind that if you are doing 16-inch on centers and how to do it the correct way, you're going to be putting your tape measure up to the board, and you're going to be marking 16-inch. Plus, you're going to be marking 3/4 of an inch, because that is half of the thickness of 1.5 inches. And that way, when you lay your actual board down, you are actually going to be laying it on the side of where that 3/4 of an inch is at. So that, I mean, if you put the board down and you're covering the 16-inch mark that you made, you're never going to see it. So put it to 3/4 of an inch to the side and line your board up with that 3/4 of an inch. Just know which side you're actually making it, and put an X to where you're going to be laying your board down. Okay, so I flipped this board over so you guys can get a better view of what it looks like 16-inch on center. So it doesn't matter what line or marking you're making, an X is always the easiest to make. Say you make a line or a circle or a square or draw a face. You know, whatever the case is, make sure that you're making that marking 3/4 of an inch before or beyond or in front of whatever, in front of that 16-inch on center or after the 16-inch on center. It's got to be 3/4 of an inch. So look at this 2x4 for an example, and half the marking is at 16-inch on center. On the right side of it is going to be 3/4 of an inch. If you were just to lay your block down on 16-inch on center, you're never going to see exactly where you're at. So you need to make sure that you're making that marking on the right or left side of that 16-inch on center. Always use a speed square to make sure that you're leveled up and down with that line. Even though it looks like it could be right on, it's never going to be exactly on unless you got lucky. So make sure that you're lining it up right with that line with a speed square of some sort. Alright, so here we have all our boards cut to length. They should all be at 93 inches, basically the same amount, the same measurement that you measured with the first one on the edge boards, so that everything's going to match up. Everything should be 93 inches, and if you can see on the edge right here, everything is flush with each other, And that's basically what you want to make sure, that everything is exactly the same. Okay, so one of the very important portions of this project is to make sure that your wood that you're working with is leveled and straight and everything's, not bowed out. So the way to do that is to look at down the line and look on the edges of it and see whether or not it's bowed out. So this one has a little bow to it. It's not bad. But the next board right here that we're going to be picking up, you can see how straight it is exactly. So you can see right down the line, it's straight, it's not bowed out. And, whether or not you're going to take forever inside of the department store to where you're purchasing the lumber and everybody's looking at you in a weird manner, so be it. We're going to be using the 10 2.5-inch deck screws here to be screwing these in. The remainder of the project's going to be using some nails. So just make sure that when you're purchasing, you can do this with nails or deck screws. It really doesn't matter. The deck screws they make nowadays are really, really durable, and they hold in just as good as the nails. Just make sure whatever you're purchasing is actually exterior or galvanized screws or nails. That's to avoid corrosion in the future. Okay, so this is how I set out my floor joists. Again, you can see the 1 foot overhang from the middle of that concrete block to the end, pretty much your rim or head joist. What I have in the middle of those concrete blocks are my joist hangers, where I'm going to be placing another 2x4 pressure treated lumber between those concrete blocks. So again, you could do this however you want. If you want to go 16-inch on centers, so be it. I chose to go this way, and it's going to work perfectly fine. So there's different ways to make sure that your actual frame is squared. Here's one way, just using the speed square to make sure that everything's at a 90. There's another way, if you go corner to corner, to make sure that, let's say this is 130 inches from corner to corner, you have to make sure that in diagonal, each diagonal is 130 inches. And if you're off an inch, just keep it adjusting until you're absolutely leveled. So again, speed squared does the same exact thing. Okay, so by code, you're required to anchor this into the ground. Figure out how to anchor this into the ground somehow. The majority of this came from making the aluminum or steel sheds because they could blow away with the wind. Anything that's not actually anchored into concrete or a slab is required to be anchored into the ground. So the way I'm doing it here is I'm placing a stake into the ground, putting one of these, I guess a hook into the actual floor joist, and I'm going to be tying basically a chain or a wire, thick wire, to that eye hole of the of this portion I'm putting right here into the 2x4. I'm going to be tying it into the stake that's into the ground, and that's basically going to be my anchor from the actual shed portion to the ground. Okay, so once I have all my floor joists in, it's time to start laying the plywood. And this is going to be your base for where you're walking, laying down your material for your wood floor. If you decide to go on tile, make sure you put some cement board over this. Whatever you decide to do, this is your base portion for walking. If everything matches up with this, how I made it by 8x8, these sheets of plywood right here are 4x8, so everything should be lined up exactly to the corners of the plywood to match with the corners of each and every single portion of the shed. And each edge should match up. These are exactly 4x8. So when purchasing plywood, it's a lot different than when purchasing lumber. So the majority of the time, if done right, the plywood should be cut at the length they advertise. So let's say that these plywoods, which they are 4x8, they should be 4x8. It's a lot different than when purchasing lumber, that when they say it's 2x4x, let's say 8, which is 96 inches, they actually show you on the bottom actual size, which could be 96.5 inches. It could be 95.25 inches. Whatever they sell it at, they will show you the actual size, so you're not actually buying, the full length of an 8-footer. And with plywood, it's a little different. They actually sell it at the length that they advertise. So going around this base, you can see how all the corners match up exactly to the corners of the actual floor joist. The header, the rim joist, everything matches up exactly to where it needs to be. Okay, so because of the fact that I did not go 16-inch on centers, I need to know where my floor joists are at. So I know that I screwed in some deck screws on each side of these header boards. And what I know is I'm going to be making a chalk line from each and every screw that are attached from the header board to the floor joist, and I'm going to be marking with a chalk line on each and every one, so I know where I'm going to nail in this plywood to the floor joist. It's going to be right in the middle. So you will need a chalk line for this portion plus other portions of this project. Okay, so because I'm working by myself here and I don't have an additional person helping me hold the chalk line on one side, I'm putting a screw on the same line as where I actually screwed in the floor joist. And what that's going to do for me is it's going to help me hold the chalk line so that when I go to the other side, I'll be able to snap the line and it's going to be as if somebody's actually holding it for me. This portion right here is not going to ruin the header joist. It's basically just going to help me reinforce the chalk line, and eventually I'll be screwing this back in anyways. Okay, so I have all my screws in exactly lined up where I actually screwed in the floor joist. And all I'm going to do is grab my chalk line and I'm going to run it down from that screw. I'm going to hook it into that screw, run it down to the opposite side where I have the screws in the other side, the other header of the floor for the floor joist where they're attached. And I'm just going to snap a line, and I'm going to do that for the entire plywood area so that I have a line right down the middle, and I'm going to know where the middle of all my floor joists are at. Okay, so just remember that I did not go 16-inch on centers on these floor joists. If I was making a larger building, if I was making a larger shed or a larger structure, I would be going 16-inch on centers. But because of the fact that I made it specifically 8x8, and I knew that the plywood's going to lay straight on with my cuts I'm going to make, and I know that within this floor joist itself, this is sufficient enough floor joist for the size shed I'm going to be building, I didn't go 16-inch on centers. So I have all my chalk lines snapped now, and all these screws that I have exposed, I'm just going to go ahead and screw them back in. You could take them out if you want, but screw them back in if you want to, and it's going to act as an additional reinforcement for all your floor joists that you have in there. So why not use them if you already have them? Okay, so now that I have all my chalk lines snapped on the plywood, there's different ways you can do this. You could do this the old-fashioned way and hammer and nail and just nail right onto those chalk lines. That's one way. Or invest in a nail gun, and it makes the job go by so much faster. Here I'm using a pass-load compressed nail gun. Basically, it doesn't require any compressor to it. It has an air tank that goes right into there, and you basically just have a load of nails and following all your lines on your chalk line or around the shed itself, the edging, and just nailing it right in. It makes the job go by so much faster. Basically what you're doing is going about 4 to every 6 inches with the nail gun, and you'll be done in no time. So you can see the string of nails I'm putting right into the nail gun. I'm not quite sure how many come in that string, but there's quite a bit. And when you run out, all you got to do is replace it. It's better than hammering in and pulling a nail out of your toolbox or your tool belt and having to hammer in one every 5 seconds rather than just nailing this in every second. So again, 4 to 6 inches on the chalk line, around the edges. Just get enough nails in there to make sure that this thing's going to last. So don't be cheap on it. Make sure you do this right, and that way you know that it's going to be a long-lasting structure for you. Alright, so here's the end result of the actual base of the shed. You can see that everything's proportioned, everything is right where I want it. There's nothing about this that looks like it's offset, that it's crooked. Everything was lined up and leveled off, and I know that this structure on the bottom base is leveled based on the fact that I had already leveled everything off. You don't see any concrete blocks, and that's exactly what I wanted. Okay, so now that you're up to this point, you really can't make any adjustments. I'm just showing you this level on the base just to show you that everything is leveled off. If it's not leveled, you pretty much did something wrong. At this point, there's really no way to adjust that unless you take this whole entire base off and readjust the flooring itself. You can see that the bubble in the middle of the level is all leveled off. It's right in the middle, right where we want it. There's no concrete blocks exposed, no tripping hazards. This is basically the ideal way to make this base portion. So again, thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the framing, the roofing, the sheathing, everything else with this shed. So please don't forget to subscribe, and that way you can watch some more of these videos. Thanks.